40 people are dead and more than 100 injured, many seriously, after a fire tore through a bar.
Turning to our top story this morning, officials in Switzerland have revealed sparklers in champagne bottles.
New Year's Eve, a night meant for celebration, music, and new beginnings. But in Switzerland, this new year began with sirens. At the luxury ski resort of Crans, Montana, a crowded bar hosting New Year celebrations suddenly turned into a scene of panic, injuries, and death. What went wrong inside that bar? How did a night of celebration turn deadly in one of Europe's safest resort towns? Swiss authorities have launched a criminal investigation, and the answers are still unfolding. Tonight, we break down what happened in Crans, Montana, and why this New Year tragedy has left an entire country asking questions. On New Year's Eve, as people across Switzerland gathered to welcome the start of a new year, serious and deadly incident unfolded inside a bar at the luxury ski resort of Crans, Montana. The night had begun like any other New Year celebration. Bars were busy, music was playing, and people were gathered indoors to escape the winter cold. At this particular venue, the bar was operating at peak capacity, filled with guests celebrating the countdown to midnight. Then, without warning, the situation inside the bar changed. In a matter of moments, celebration gave way to confusion and fear. People inside began shouting, movement became chaotic, and emergency calls were placed reporting a serious incident with multiple injured individuals. What exactly triggered the chaos was not immediately clear to those inside, and even now remains under investigation. What authorities were able to confirm early on was the scale of the incident. Emergency services were informed that several people had been hurt, some seriously. As responders arrived and began assessing the situation, it became clear that the incident was not minor. Injuries were not isolated, and the number of people affected suggested a major emergency rather than a simple accident. Later, officials confirmed the most devastating detail: there were fatalities. For many inside the bar, the transition from celebration to emergency happened so quickly that there was little time to react calmly. Crowded indoor conditions, loud music, and limited visibility added to the confusion. People were focused on getting out, helping others, or simply trying to understand what had just happened. As the seriousness of the situation became clear, New Year's celebrations in the immediate area were stopped. The bar was cleared, surrounding access was restricted, and emergency teams took full control of the scene. What had started as a festive gathering was now an active emergency zone. At this early stage, authorities avoided speculation. They did not immediately describe the exact cause or mechanism of the incident. Instead, they focused on stabilizing the situation, assisting victims, and preserving the scene for investigation. One conclusion, however, was unavoidable from the beginning. This was a major New Year tragedy, not an ordinary incident, and it will require a thorough and formal investigation to understand how it happened. To fully understand the weight of this incident, the location cannot be treated as a small detail. Where this happened is central to why the story drew such intense attention. Crans, Montana is one of Switzerland's most established and carefully managed alpine resorts. It is a destination built around planning, structure, and control. Tourism here is not informal or spontaneous. It is regulated, seasonal, and designed to handle large crowds safely. Every winter, thousands of visitors arrive expecting not just luxury, but reliability. Ski resorts like Crans, Montana operate under strict safety frameworks because they regularly deal with international tours, packed hotels, and venues, high-density indoor gatherings, major holiday events. New Year's Eve is the peak of that system. On this night, bars and venues are expected to operate at their highest capacity. Staff levels are increased. Crowd flow is anticipated. Authorities are aware that most people will be indoors, close together, and focused on celebration rather than awareness. This is why the setting matters so much. The bar where the incident occurred was not hidden or isolated. It was part of the resort's public celebration environment, a place where guests felt comfortable letting their guard down. People trusted that the venue had been inspected, approved, and prepared for a night like this. That trust is important. In high-end resorts, safety is often assumed rather than questioned. Guests believe exits will be accessible, crowd limits will be respected, and Emergency systems will work if needed. These assumptions shape how people behave in emergencies and how quickly situations can escalate when expectations collapse. Another critical factor is crowd behavior. On New Year's Eve, people stay closer than usual. Movement inside venues becomes restricted. Loud music limits communication. Reaction time slows. In such conditions, even a sudden disruption can cause panic before understanding. People react instinctively, not logically. They move toward exits without clear direction. They follow crowds rather than instructions. This is not unique to Crans-Montana. It is a known risk of major celebrations everywhere. But when it happens in a place known for control and preparation, the contrast becomes disturbing. The setting also explains why authorities treated the incident with immediate seriousness. In a resort that depends on safety reputation, any failure, real or perceived, carries wider consequences. Panic cannot be allowed to spread beyond the scene. Access must be controlled quickly. Information must be handled carefully. This is why roads were restricted, the venue was sealed, and officials avoided early explanation because the location was not just a backdrop. It was a promise, and that promise was broken. And when a place designed to manage crowds ensures comfort and security, instead becomes the site of tragedy, the question is no longer just what happened. It becomes, how did the environment itself contribute to the outcome? That question now sits at the center of the investigation. The moments immediately after the incident were the most chaotic and the most revealing. Inside the bar, there was no clear understanding of what had happened. People did not have time to analyze the situation or wait for instructions. What they felt first was fear, and fear, in crowded spaces, spreads faster than information. As confusion took hold, people reacted instinctively. Some rushed toward exits without knowing whether they were safe. Others stopped to help injured friends or strangers. A few froze, overwhelmed by noise, movement, and uncertainty. In crowded indoor environments like this, panic does not arrive quietly. It arrives all at once. Voices rise. People push forward. Balance is lost. And within seconds, order disappears. Outside the bar, the contrast was stark. What had been a lively New Year atmosphere in Crans-Montana moments earlier was suddenly filled with confusion and distress. People stumbled out into the cold, some bleeding, others visibly shaken. Many were still trying to understand what they had just escaped from. Phones came out. Calls were made. Voices shook as people tried to explain what they had seen or what they hadn't fully understood yet. Emergency calls continued to pour in, each one adding urgency to the response. Evacuating a crowded venue during a crisis is rarely clean or orderly, especially on a night like New Year's Eve. Heavy winter clothing, alcohol consumption, loud noise, and packed spaces all slow movement. People struggle to see clearly. Instructions, if given, are hard to hear. Panic overrides training. As the bar was cleared, authorities focused on two priorities: getting everyone out safely, preventing further danger. People were pushed back to create space. Entry points were controlled. The goal was not comfort, it was containment. For many who were evacuated, the experience was disorienting. Some were separated from their groups. Others were unsure whether friends were still inside. A few remained near the scene, refusing to leave until they had answers. This uncertainty intensified the shock. As emergency responders began treating victims outside the venue, the seriousness of the incident became undeniable. Stretchers appeared. Medical teams moved quickly. Ambulances arrived and departed repeatedly. This was the moment when the reality of the situation began to sink in for everyone watching. This was not just a disrupted celebration. This was not just injuries. Lives had been lost. That realization changed the mood entirely. Nearby celebrations were halted. Music stopped. Venues that had nothing to do with the incident closed early. Across the resort, people stopped celebrating and started waiting for information, for confirmation, for reassurance. Shock does not stay contained to one building. Staff members who had worked the event were visibly affected. Guests who had escaped safely struggled to process what they had witnessed. Locals, hearing the sirens and seeing the emergency response, gathered at a distance in disbelief. In the absence of clear information, anxiety grew. Authorities were aware of this risk. This is why access was restricted and why communication was tightly controlled. In moments like this, uncontrolled crowds and misinformation can create secondary emergencies. Silence, though frustrating, was a form of control. For investigators, the immediate aftermath is not just emotional, it is analytical. These first moments help determine how panic spread, whether exits function properly, how quickly people were able to evacuate, and whether emergency responders faced obstacles. The way people behaved under pressure reveals how prepared or unprepared a system truly was. In Crans-Montana, the aftermath exposed how quickly a controlled celebration can collapse when something goes wrong. And once that collapse begins, stopping it becomes extremely difficult. The immediate aftermath was not just about chaos, it was about realization. A realization that a New Year celebration had turned into a tragedy. A realization that safety could not be taken for granted. And a realization that the answers would not come quickly. Because after panic fades, questions remain. When the first emergency calls reached authorities, it became clear almost immediately that this was not a routine situation. In Crans-Montana, emergency services are trained to respond quickly. Winter tourism brings regular incidents, ski injuries, falls, weather-related emergencies. But what unfolded on this New Year's night was of a completely different scale. Police units were dispatched to the location within minutes. Their first task was not investigation, it was control. Crowded public spaces can become dangerous even after the initial incident has ended. Panic can spread, rumors can trigger further chaos, and unregulated movement can block emergency access. Police officers immediately began securing the area around the bar, restricting entry and pushing crowds back. Roads near the venue were closed. Access points were guarded. Nearby gatherings were dispersed. This was done to create a controlled zone where emergency teams could operate without interference. At the same time, officers inside the venue focused on clearing remaining occupants and ensuring that no one was left trapped or in immediate danger. Firefighters arrived alongside police, and their role was critical. In incidents where the exact cause is unknown, responders must assume risk until proven otherwise. Fire crews assessed the structure of the bar, checked for hazards, and ensured that conditions inside were safe enough for medical teams to enter. They examined air quality and ventilation, possible sources of ongoing danger, structural stability of the building. This process happens quickly but carefully. Rushing without assessment can endanger responders and victims alike. Only once firefighters confirmed that the environment was sufficiently secure could full medical operations continue inside and around the venue. Paramedics and medical teams faced the most difficult task: prioritizing lives. In mass casualty situations, medical responders cannot treat everyone at once. Instead, they follow triage protocols designed to save as many lives as possible. Victims were assessed rapidly. Those with life-threatening injuries were prioritized. Others were stabilized on site. Some required immediate hospital transport. These decisions are made in seconds, often in emotionally overwhelming conditions. Noise, limited space, and distressed bystanders all complicate the process. Ambulances arrived in waves. As one vehicle departed with a patient, another moved in to take its place. Communication with nearby hospitals was constant, ensuring facilities were ready to receive multiple injured individuals at the same time. What the public often does not see is the level of coordination required during such responses. Emergency services operated under a unified command structure. Police, fire, and medical teams shared information in real time. Decisions about access, evacuation routes, and hospital distribution were continuously updated. This coordination is especially important in resort towns, where infrastructure must handle sudden surges in demand. New Year's Eve added an extra layer of complexity. Roads were already busy. Venues across the resort were crowded. Emergency resources were stretched. Despite this, responders worked to prevent the situation from escalating further. As the response continued, authorities made a critical determination. This was a major incident. This designation triggers additional protocols. Senior command involvement, expanded resource allocation, tighter control of information, and preparation for a prolonged operation It also signals that the event will not be resolved quickly. From this point forward, the response shifted gradually from immediate rescue to stabilization and preparation for investigation. One of the most difficult challenges in such situations is balancing urgency with preservation. While medical teams focused on saving lives, police officers began documenting the scene. Photographs were taken, entry and exit points were noted, witnesses were identified. This was done carefully, without interfering with rescue efforts, because once the emergency phase ends, the questions begin, and the answers depend on what is preserved in those first critical hours. The scale and speed of the response tell us something important. Authorities recognized early that this was not an isolated or minor event. They treated it with the seriousness required to prevent further harm and to lay the groundwork for accountability. Lives were saved because of this response, but lives were also lost before help could arrive. And once the sirens faded and the injured were transported, the focus inevitably shifted from response to responsibility. Once the immediate emergency response was brought under control, police moved into the most critical phase of the case, formal investigation. At the ski resort of Crans, Montana, officers officially designated the bar and its surrounding area as a crime scene. This step is taken only when authorities believe that the cause of an incident cannot be explained quickly or casually, and when legal responsibility may eventually need to be determined. This decision marked a turning point. The night was no longer just about what happened. It became about how and why it happened. Once a crime scene is declared, preservation becomes the top priority. Police restricted access to the venue completely. Only authorized personnel were allowed inside. Every movement in and out of the area was logged. Even emergency responders were required to coordinate closely with investigators to ensure that critical evidence was not unintentionally disturbed. This level of control may appear excessive to the public, but it serves a clear purpose. In incidents involving multiple fatalities, the smallest detail can later become significant. The position of objects, the condition of fixtures, the state of exits, or the placement of debris if these details are altered too early. The opportunity to reconstruct the event accurately can be lost forever. Forensic teams do not look for dramatic answers. They look for patterns. Inside the bar, specialists conducted a slow and systematic examination of the space. They documented the layout exactly as it was found, using photographs, measurements, and detailed notes. Every visible sign of damage or disturbance was recorded. Forensic analysis focuses on questions such as where the incident originated, how it progressed through the space, how quickly conditions changed, and whether any systems failed to operate as intended. This process often reveals facts that eyewitnesses cannot reliably provide. Under extreme stress, human perception is fragmented. People remember fear more clearly than sequence. Forensics fills in those gaps. Beyond the physical scene, investigators also turned their attention to documentation. Police requested records related to licensing and inspections, maximum occupancy, approvals, safety certifications, stat training, and emergency procedure. These documents help determine whether the venue was operating within permitted limits and whether established safety protocols were followed. Importantly, this review does not automatically imply wrongdoing. It is a standard step whenever a serious incident occurs in a public venue. Investigators must establish a baseline before they can identify any deviation from it. At the same time, police began the process of collecting witness statements. Witnesses included employees working at the bar, guests who were present during the incident, first responders who arrived early, and individuals nearby who may have heard. Seen key moments interviews were conducted carefully and, in many cases, repeatedly. Initial statements capture raw impressions. Follow-up interviews help clarify timelines and resolve inconsistencies. Investigators are particularly cautious during this phase. Media coverage, rumors, and conversations between witnesses can unintentionally influence memory. That is why police often ask witnesses to avoid discussing details publicly. Accuracy matters more than speed. As the investigation progressed, authorities maintained tight control over public communication. This silence was deliberate. Police avoided releasing partial findings or speculative explanations because Premature information can mislead the public, damage the investigation, or create legal complications later. Instead, officials confirmed only what could be stated with certainty: that a serious incident occurred, that there were fatalities, and that criminal standard investigation was underway. Everything else was withheld until evidence could support it. Investigations of this scale do not produce instant answers. Each piece of evidence must be analyzed. Each statement must be cross-checked. Each conclusion must be defensible. In a place like Crans-Montana, where safety and regulation are central to public trust, authorities understand that their findings will be examined closely by courts, by the public, and by international observers. That pressure demands precision. This phase of the case will determine whether the incident was preventable, whether any systems failed, and whether accountability is required. It is here, not during the chaos of the night, that responsibility, if any, will be established. Until that work is complete, speculation has no value. Only evidence does. As news of the incident spread beyond Crans-Montana, the reaction was immediate and emotional. What had happened inside a single bar quickly became a national and international story. People across Switzerland woke up to headlines describing a New Year celebration that had ended in death, and the contrast between the occasion and the outcome unsettled many. For locals, the shock was deeply personal. Crans-Montana is not a place associated with fear or disorder. It is a community built around tourism, hospitality, and seasonal rhythm. Many residents either knew people who were present that night or worked in similar venues themselves. The incident shattered the assumption that such tragedies happen elsewhere, not here. Among tourists, the reaction was one of disbelief. Visitors choose destinations like Crans-Montana precisely because they are seen as safe and well-managed. For some, the incident raised immediate concerns about crowd safety, emergency preparedness, and whether the risks of large celebrations had been underestimated. As the story gained attention, media pressure increased. Journalists sought answers quickly. Questions were asked repeatedly. What exactly caused the incident? Was it an accident? Could it have been prevented? Why were there so many casualties in a licensed venue? Authorities, however, did not provide immediate explanations. This gap between public curiosity and official silence created tension. In the absence of confirmed facts, speculation began to circulate, especially online. Authorities were aware of this risk, which is why they continued to emphasize that the investigation was ongoing and that conclusions would only be shared once verified. This period of uncertainty is often the most difficult. Families of victims want clarity. Survivors want understanding. The public wants reassurance. Yet investigators must slow everything down, because rushing answers can lead to mistakes that cannot be undone. What made this case especially troubling was the number of unanswered questions that refused to fade. How did a New Year celebration reach such a critical point so quickly? Were safety measures sufficient for the size of the crowd? Did people have enough time and space to escape once the situation turned dangerous? These questions did not accuse anyone directly, but they lingered in public discussion. They reflected a broader anxiety about large-scale celebrations and the fragile line between joy and disaster. In Crans-Montana, New Year festivities did not simply end early. They ended with reflection, with silence, with a sense that something fundamental had gone wrong, even if the exact reason was still unknown. And as investigators continued their work behind closed doors, the public was left waiting, not just for facts, but for reassurance that this tragedy would lead to answers, not just headlines. With the emergency response completed and the crime scene secured, the focus in Crans-Montana has fully shifted to what comes next. This phase is quieter, slower, and far less visible than the night of the incident, but it is also the most important. Investigators are now working through evidence step by step. Forensic findings, witness statements, safety records, and operational procedures are being examined together, not in isolation. This process takes time because each conclusion must be supported, not assumed. In cases involving public venues and multiple fatalities, even small errors can undermine the entire investigation. Authorities have made it clear that answers will not be rushed. In a place like Crans-Montana, where public trust in safety and regulation is central to the community and its economy. Any official conclusion will carry long-term consequences. That is why investigators are proceeding cautiously, aware that their findings may influence future regulations, venue operations, and how large celebrations are managed. For families of those who lost their lives, this waiting period is especially painful. Grief is made heavier by uncertainty. Survivors, too, are left replaying moments in their minds, searching for meaning in something that still feels sudden and unreal. While the investigation continues behind closed doors, the human impact remains visible and ongoing. Public attention has not faded, but it has changed. The initial shock has given way to reflection. Questions about crowd safety, emergency preparedness, and responsibility are now part of a broader conversation, not just in Crans-Montana but beyond it. This is often how tragedies leave their mark, not only through loss, but through the changes they force afterward. Eventually, authorities will release their findings. When they do, those findings will determine whether failures occurred, whether rules were broken, and whether accountability is required. Until then, restraint remains essential. Speculation cannot replace evidence, and emotion cannot replace fact. For now, Crans-Montana remains suspended between what happened and what will be explained. A place once defined by celebration has been forced into reflection, and a new year that was meant to begin with joy has instead become a moment that will be remembered for its silence. This story is not yet finished, but it is one that will be measured not by speed but by truth. If you want to stay informed with verified reporting and calm, in-depth analysis of stories that matter, make sure to support this work. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future updates as this investigation develops. And if you believe responsible reporting is important, share this video so others can understand the facts without speculation. We'll continue to follow this story carefully and bring you confirmed information as soon as it becomes available.